Let's look at an example situation where we can use abstract classes. If you remember from our previous examples, we had an employee class, and this is an example from the book. And in your previous week's lab assignment, the lab task, you are asked to add some more subclasses to the employee class that you already had. So we had an employee class and we had a subclass of that employee class, that was the commission employee class, and then we had a subclass of the commission employee, that was the base plus commission employee class. And your task was to add some more subclasses like the hourly employee class and the salaried employee class. And this was an example of inheritance and taking advantage of inheritance. The basic idea was the common details of all of these employees will be combined into one superclass, and that class was named an employee class. You are also required to use composition that includes a kind of date variables into the employee class, but since we do not want to focus on composition over here, they have been commented out. The date variables have been commented out. In this class, we have three instance variables that are common to all of these employees. We have the constructor for the employee class and the setter getter methods for these variables, and then we have a toString method to print these details. Then we have a commission employee class. The commission employee class has two of its own variables and extends the employee class. So we do not need to redefine the variables that are already there in the employee class. We can directly inherit those variables from the employee class. Now whenever we declare a constructor for the commission employee class, the commission employee class constructor will call the superclass's constructor and pass on the variables that are required by the superclass's constructor. And the rest of the two variables are initialized in the commission employee class. Now we are calling the setter methods over here, which is something that is not a good programming practice, but we should, although we can call these methods, but there can be problems when we call an overridable method in our constructor, because these method will be initial whatever the code there is in the constructor is executed before we go into the rest of the programs. So if you are calling this method from within the constructor, these methods will be called before they are being overridden by the other classes. So what we should do here, and this is something that we should follow for all of our programming practice, that even though we have this set grass cells method that validates the value for our grass cells, so the minimum value for the grass cells needs to be non-negative, and otherwise we should be throwing an exception. We will be studying exception handling in detail in the upcoming lectures, but if you remember, this was something that we were doing in our earlier lectures as well, that we were throwing an exception whenever we are faced with a situation which was supposed to disrupt our program. So a better programming practice would be to validate this value over here within the constructor instead of calling the setter methods. The compiler will allow us, but it can lead to some logical errors in our programs. So we should avoid this practice of calling our setter methods inside the constructor. So ideally, what we should do is we should validate these variables inside the constructor, and if everything goes all right, our variables should be initialized. So you need to remember that although the compiler allows us to call the setter methods from within the constructor, we should follow the programming practice of not to call the setter methods or any overridable method from within the constructor. Instead, we can write the code separately for validating our variables, and then we can write the same code in our setter methods. Now, the two variables that are specific to the commission employee are initialized within the commission employee classes constructor, and we remember that the first thing that we do in the subclasses constructor is to call the superclasses constructor and pass any variables that are required by the superclasses constructor. And we have over here a toString method that is supposed to print the details of the commission employee. Now we are also using overriding over here. We are overriding the superclasses toString method, and we are adding to the details that are being printed by the toString method in the employee class along with the details that are specific to the commission employee class. So the super dot toString will call the superclasses toString method, and we will add to that the details from the sub commission employee method. We also need to have return the earnings of this employee. Now the earnings of this employee, if you remember, were the gross sales multiply the commission rate. That was the total earnings of this employee. Now this employee also had a subclass, and that subclass was extending the commission employee class, and it has one of its own variables, that is the base salary, and the earnings of this employee were coming from some base salary plus the commission that this employee was earning on that base on the gross sales. If you look at the constructor of the base plus commission employee, we are passing these 5 variables to the superclasses constructor, which will be passed on to the commission employee, and 3 of these variables will be passed on to the employee class by the commission employee, and 2 will be initialized by the commission employee. One variable is initialized within the constructor of the base plus commission employee. Now again, we are using a call to the set base salary method. This is something that we should be avoiding, so we can replace this call to the set method by a separate validation and then an initialization. The variable names should match, so whatever the base salary variable is over here, now this comes to the if statement, and then we have, so simply if the base salary is non-zero, then we can assign the base salary to the class's base salary variable. Then we had some more subclasses, like for example we have an hourly employee, and the earnings for the hourly employee was, there was some hourly wages that the employee was earning, and if the employee was doing some overtime work, we were paying some extra amount to that employees per hour. The extra payment was only for the extra number of hours that employee was working. You can see the detail of this in the lab work from the previous week, as well as in the exercise that the lab work was extracted from. Again, you need to replace this code with the proper validation code that we have used in the setter methods. And finally, we have the salaried employee. The salaried employee has its own earnings method, and the toString method is overridden from the superclass, that is the employee class. And again, you need to replace this code with the proper validation code that is here in the set weekly salary method. Instead of calling the set weekly salary, we should you directly validate this variable over here, and then we can assign the value of the weekly salary to our instance variable. So we have this hierarchical relationship between these classes, and as you can see that we are using a package name payrolls payroll system package, and all of these classes are supposed to have the name of the package at the top. As we can see over here, all of our classes will have the name of the package at the top. Now if we were to import some class from some other package, we would be using an import statement, but as we talked about the lecture in about packages, we need to write the package name at the top of this class. And if you go to your documents folder maybe, or where you are saving your NetBeans projects by default, you will find this folder, and then you will find all of these source files within that folder. And we have seen how we can create a new package. So the first thing that we need to do whenever we start a new project is to create a package and then add our source files into that package. You can have more than one packages within the same project. If we look at our example, we can see that all of the employees need to have some kind of an earnings method, so that we can display on the screen the amount that an employee is earning, whatever the way of their earning is. So some employees are getting the commission, some employees are getting the base plus commission, base salary plus some commission, some employees are being paid hourly, and some employees are working on a weekly salary. They all have their own way of earning their earnings, but each and every employee is supposed to have an earnings method. That is why we have included an earnings method in each of these employee classes or subclasses of the employee class. Here we can have any method, we can change the names of these methods, and we can then use these methods. What we saw in our discussion on abstract classes, that wherever there are common methods, and that is why we use inheritance as well, the common methods are supposed to be combined in the superclass. And now what we can do is, over here in our test class, we can create the objects of these classes. So we have an object of the employee class, and we can print the details of this object. We can have an object of the salaried employee, the hourly employee, the commission employee, and the base plus commission employee initialized through their required arguments. And as we saw in the kitchen chef example in the lecture as well, we can create an array, and we can assign all of these objects of our subclasses to the array of the superclass. We have created an array of the superclass. Now the data type of this array is our employee class, so we can say that this is kind of a variable of the employee class, and we can assign our subclasses to the as elements into this array. And then we can use our for loop, or for each loop, or enhanced for loop, to print these implies one by one. We have seen how a for each loop or enhanced for loop works, so we can print these details one by one using the enhanced for loop. If we look at the output, we should see So we are printing the employee object separately, and then we are printing all of the details of these employees through the enhanced for loop. You can see that we are printing the same object, but what it is being done over here is the objects are being picked one by one from our array, and they are being printed along with the details. The toString method of each of these employee is being called, and the details of that employee are being printed over here. Now where can we take advantage of the abstract classes over here? Let's say for example we want to add another kind of an employee to this package, and let's say we can name it anything like a piece worker. You might have seen this in our exercise. So we have another employee, and this employee will have its own way of earning. So what we do is we extend the employee class. So most of the details will come from the employee class. And we need to add a constructor that calls the superclasses constructor over here. So we can add a constructor that calls the superclasses constructor. And this is the first thing that we need to do in the subclasses constructor. Now we saw that as soon as we extended the employee class, we received an error from the compiler that we need to call the superclasses constructor. But if we now add a toString method to this class, and we call the toString method of the superclass over here, we should be able to print the details of the superclass only with these details. Now every employee is supposed to have some kind of an earning. We do not have employees who work for free for us, but our program is not enforcing that requirement on our subclass piece worker. So what we need to do is we want that whenever we create a subclass of the employee class, that subclass must implement some earnings method. And to enforce that, what we can do here, and we saw that we have an earnings method that is required in all of the employees. So what we can do is we can make this method as abstract. Now what should happen is that it becomes compulsory on all of the subclasses of the employee class to implement the earnings method. Now if you remember, we said that in order to be able to add an abstract method to a class, that class must be declared as abstract. So this definition will not work now. Employee is not an abstract and does not override abstract method earnings in employee. So there are two situations that we can add an abstract method. Either we need to make it an abstract, or we can extend the method from some other class. So we changed the definition of our class, and now we can see that the piece worker is not now bound by the compiler to implement the abstract method. Otherwise we will get a compiler error. And similarly, if you remember, now we cannot create an object of the employee class because the employee is an abstract class. It is an incomplete class, and we can only have the objects of the subclasses of the employee class, but we cannot declare an object of the employee class. We will get a compilation error. We can maybe override, if we can see, or we need to add the earnings method to this class that returns some kind of earnings for this employee. Now we are bound to implement the earnings method because this is an abstract method, and to ensure that this is an overridden method, we can add the override annotation to this method. This will ensure that this earnings method is overridden from a superclass. Now the compiler will check the signature of this earnings method with the method in our superclass and will try to match these signatures. We can add the override annotation over here, and we can do the same for all of our subclasses. So this was one situation where we can take advantage of using an abstract class and an abstract method to be able to ensure that all of the subclasses of this employee class implement that method. Now this will work the same as previously. If we try to print the details apart from the object of the employee class, because we are no longer able to declare an object for our employee class because the employee class has been declared as abstract, and we are able to print the details of our subclasses the same way as previously. Now since we have initialized all of these classes using the superclass reference, what should we do if we need to access a method from one of these subclasses? Because we cannot directly access the subclasses methods with the superclass references. That is something we already understand. What we can do is we can use downcasting. We talked about downcasting in the lecture on inheritance, and we'll also look at the use of the instance of operator that we discussed in the previous lecture. In this for loop, as we understand that what we do is we go through each of the element of this employees array, and when we print that element, that is a simple operation that we were doing. Now the task is, let's say we want to increase the base salary of our base plus commission employee. We want to raise the salary of that employee by, let's say, 10%. So how can we do that? For that we need to call the get base salary method, maybe, or maybe the earnings method of that employee, and add the 10% increase to that salary. Now we cannot call that method with any of these superclasses references. What we can do is, if I uncomment this code, first we need to to identify and separate the base plus commission employees object, and we can do that by using the instance of operator. When we are going through the elements of the array, we want to check that if that element is an instance of the base plus commission employee, what we should do is we should downcast or convert that object from the superclass's reference to the subclass's reference, so that we can use that object to call a subclass's method, and we store that in a new object. So we store the conversion in a new object of the base plus commission employee, and this line is the syntax of downcasting. This current employee is a variable of the superclass, and in order to convert this variable into the subclass base plus commission employees object, we use the base plus commission employee and the parenthesis. This will be converted into the base plus commission employee, and it will be assigned to this new object employee, or whatever you call the new object, that is of type the base plus commission employee. Now it will allow us to call, let's say, the set base salary method of the base plus commission employee using this object of the base plus commission employee. We will increment the base salary. We can get the base salary of the base plus commission employee using by calling the get base salary of that employee and multiplying that by the 10%. That will increase the base salary of the employee by 10% and set this new value to the base salary of the base plus commission employee class. Now we can check the new base salary by calling the get base salary of the employee after we have incremented the value, and this should give us the new base salary of the base plus commission employee, and we can check the total earnings of that employee if there is an increase in the earnings of that employee. So we can see that how we can use the instance of operator to pick one object from an array of objects. This can be an array or it can be an array list of objects. So we can pick one object from a list of or an array of objects, and we can check. Now these are compatible types because there is a superclass subclass relationship between the base plus commission employee and the commission employee. So the commission employee's variable can be compatible with the base plus commission employees object. Therefore we can check this using the instance of operator and hoping that it is true, which it should be, it for one of the situations where out of these four, one of these elements is an object of the base plus commission employee, which is this one. Now whenever this condition becomes true, that object of the superclass, that variable of the superclass will be downcasted. Let me just write downcasting. That is, it will be converted to the object of the subclass and assigned to the object an object of the subclass, and then we can use that object of the subclass to call any methods from the subclass, and we can perform any calculation or computation that we need to perform on that subclass, and we can the superclass's objects remains the same on its own. The superclass's variable is not changed, but a conversion of that variable is assigned to an object of the subclass. Now if we call the earnings method on this object, this should return the earnings of the base plus commission employee, because this is what we are trying to check over here. Confirm over here. We have confirmed that this is an object of the base plus commission employee, and after that confirmation we have performed some calculation or computation, and when we call the earnings method, this should be calling the earnings method of the base plus commission employee and return the increased earnings of that employee. So let's look at the output if we may. Now the salaried employee weekly salary earned, that it will the employee will earn the same salary. The hourly employee is earning something. So per hour there is per hour age, then there is the number of hours that the employee has worked, and the amount is earned based on those two variables. You can check if you increase the number of hours by, let's say, 5, so the employee should be earning 1.5 times more than its normal earning for those 5 hours. The commission employee is earning the commission on the gross sales. The base salaried employee, if you can check with the previous value or the value that was there at the initialization time, if it has been increased or not. So we can confirm that if the salary of the employee, that is 5,000 in this case, if the salary of the employee has been increased, new base salary with 10% increase is 5,500. So this was the earlier, the initial salary of the employee, and with the 5% increase we have this new salary for the employee, and the earnings of the employee have also increased. The total earnings are a combination of the commission that the employee is earning on the gross sales plus the base salary, so it should return the new earnings of the employee to us. This will conclude our lecture. See you in the next lectures.